Panel 3 is about nature and society. We're going to be looking at the relationship between the different parts of society and nature. And as we are discussing this, our first speaker is going to be Juan. Juan is a senior data scientist at Ecom Trading. Ecom's global goal is to aid farmers to better coffee, cocoa, cotton farming, and to provide opportunities for dignified and profitable livelihoods for generations to come. Juan completed his DPhil in plant sciences in 2016, when he investigated mechanisms that plants use to improve their water use efficiency. Now, Juan, the question for you is, can technology help us improve the human-nature relationship at scale through innovation in supply chain monitoring and management?
Thank you, Arthur. That's great. And before I answer your question, I have to say thank you so much for this opportunity, for the program, for the fantastic and fulfilling opportunity to study in Oxford, where I met fantastic people like all of you, the scholars, and some of them are my dear friends. So it's interesting because when you were asking the question, the slide that was there, it was kind of like a very kind of like bittersweet in a way, quite dramatic, because it's basically an image of probably mining and destroying of the forest. And some people actually tend to believe that we should be very negative about these things, and it is absolutely, that's true. However, I mean, more in the positive side, and when I saw that picture, I was thinking more about hope, and I recommend you actually, if you after this, go to WWF 10 Reasons for Hope in 2020. That is fantastic. And the second reason in that article is public demand is rising. So public is more informed and have more knowledge about what is going on in terms of food security, in terms of climate change, in terms of biodiversity degradation and loss. So what I'm doing, and to answer your question, how do we improve those relationships? I propose this very simple idea, and that's what I'm doing in my day-to-day, really. And it's take information and knowledge and trying to connect to people. If you go to the next slide, please. I'm going to show you some examples. Some of them are actually part of my research as a senior data scientist at Ecom Trading. So we trade cocoa, coffee, and cotton around the world. If you look at the right top, that's part of actually my research in terms of global climate change in suitability of cocoa in West Africa. And after this research, almost like if I would be in academia and I publish a paper, probably nothing will happen. But because I'm actively involved in this public and also private scenarios, now we're producing a new project where we are trying to tackle those climate change problems using specific programs, for example, with satellite data, drones, and also looking after the community and the people who are cultivating cocoa specifically. But also on the other part is this kind of like, you know, data availability and information that we're trying to make that connection towards people that makes this, for example, in the left panel available. So now we know that, for example, the Amazon was on fire during the last 2 years because the data is available and we're able to analyze, and satellite data is available. So there's a lot of information going on there. And as a data scientist, and the way to kind of like how we improve that relationship is just make that knowledge, that data connected to the people. As you could say, like, for example, talking with my boss and say, look, this is going to happen in the plantations in the next 30 years. We need to actually do something here. Or, for example, the press saying, look, this is a fundamental issue. And I think if you go to the next slide, it's pretty simple. And my answer is pretty straightforward, and is contributing that information and knowledge will arrive to the people, to the right people, indeed. And that's all. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much. Information and knowledge to the people. Thank you. And I would like to thank you so much for the participation from the people in our audience. It feels like we're back at the Ashmolean and we're all together in one room. Please continue bringing in those questions. Our next speaker is Leka, and Leka is a senior policy analyst at WHT, a US nonprofit focused on making the reduction of electricity grid emissions easier. Previously, she worked with the Indian government on expanding their cold chain infrastructure without adding to the carbon emissions to increase farmer security and income. As a researcher at the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility in Jakarta, she worked on financing and monitoring sustainable agricultural projects in Indonesia. So the context for this is that environmental change, the environmental challenge is a higher challenge to society than it is to science, because in most cases, technology exists whilst the adoption lags behind. And so the question for you is, how can we get corporations to buy into a green agenda and foster healthier relationships with the environment? Over to you.
Thanks for that, Alison, and thank you very much for having me. Let me quickly set some context. Agriculture and forestry are both an adaptation and a mitigation issue. On the one hand, 20% of global emissions are from this sector, but also farmers and forest-dependent communities are at the front line of facing climate impact. So any environmental goal, whether it's from the government or corporate sustainability goals, have to place these communities at the heart of any scheme they have, or and their long-term financial welfare. For example, palm oil in Indonesia is a hot button topic that everyone's aware of. What many people don't know is that about 50% of palm oil actually comes from small scale farmers who basically earn subsistence wages. So if there's an expectation that small scale farmers should adapt agroforestry approaches, incentivizing it and making it socially inclusive is key. On the other hand, large corporations, especially agricultural off-takers, are now increasingly adopting no deforestation pledges, emission reduction goals. And this is very much compatible with financial inclusion for small-scale farmers and forest-dependent communities, because both financial inclusion and sustainability goals of corporations rely on the same thing, which is traceability. How do you actually, when climate-friendly practice is implemented, how do you trace it down to the field? And how do you make that information available to the final customer? How do you trace the emissions down to the source? And all of that relies on traceability. Next slide, please. Traceability is an enormous issue. I only want to focus on one issue, which is greenhouse gas data for traceability. Now, many outside the sector may not know this, but current methods of monitoring ESG, or environmental and social governance, are based on out-of-date data or just are highly assumption-driven, and this is especially true for the agriculture and forestry sector. Or it can get really expensive if you want to do in-situ actual analysis at the ground level. However, and the key that is required for improving traceability in a cost-effective manner that can be applied globally is objective, real-time, and actionable data. By actionable, I mean granular, if you can trace emissions right to the source. As Juan already mentioned, there have been significant advances in remote sensing technologies that are making this possible. But when combined with recent advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning, it actually makes tracing emissions, using what you're seeing from all those cameras in space down to the ground and tracking it back to carbon emissions actionable. So what can corporations do? Of course, adopting sustainability pledges to reduce their scope 3 emissions is key. But one additional action that corporations can take is data sharing. It is a very significant action that that corporations can take, and by data here I mean ground truth data on their supply chains, things like fuel purchases, production capacities, shipping data, in situ inventories that they've already conducted. all of these help improve machine learning models and make them more accurate. And this has knock-on effects beyond just the corporate's own emissions, because it has a multiplier effect, and it benefits the entire sector. I do work on this directly as well at my work, and please feel free to write me about it. We're part of a project called Climate Trace, and I'm happy to talk about it later. Thank you very much.
So our third speaker is going to be Cedric. Cedric is a faculty member at the School of Wildlife Conservation at the Africa Leadership University in Rwanda, where he educates and develops ethical and entrepreneurial conservation leaders for the African continent, with an emphasis on the wildlife economy and policy, and assists with the department's wildlife economy research. He has over 6 years conservation experience working in academia and in the NGO, government, and private sectors. He's the founder of and lead of the Weed to Pesticide, a University of Oxford endorsed social enterprise which aims to turn an invasive weed into an organic commercial biopesticide. So Cedric, the two previous contributions focused on the corporate level and global supply chain. We now look at what small indigenous communities can do with their own power to transform their relationship with nature. And so the question for you: we often discuss ethical, biological, and health-related aspects of human-nature relationship. Is there a strong economic argument to be made that is directly relevant to small and indigenous communities? Over to you, Cedric.
My thanks to the Louis Dreyfus Foundation. I completed my MSc in Biodiversity Conservation Management in 2018, and I had the rare pleasure of working with the Louis Dreyfus Foundation in Zambia and Johannesburg, and spent some time with Robert and Ekaterina in Geneva at the headquarters. So thank you very much for your question, Atherton. So perhaps I could just start with defining the current relationship that is there between local communities, rural communities, and nature. And I would like to call it a sort of direct provisioning relationship. And the problem that you have there is that local communities are harvesting resources to feed their direct need. Food, fuel, shelter, and hunting animals so that they can be able to access meat because they really need this protein. And I would then say that, the problem with this is it's not sustainable because over time, the resources, the animals and other natural resources, they deplete. And then you get natural resource scarcity. Then that's a negative relationship that results between society and nature. Society is not really able to think much about the sustainability and think about tomorrow of the nature of nature as they are harvesting. But I think the immediate supersede the thought of tomorrow, and then also affects the relationship between natural resources. Then they'll end up in conflict because then they are trying to access as they can in order to be able to satisfy as much of their needs as they can, and also to protect that access from other communities. So that's a concern over, say, for example, animals, and conservation then comes in. You'll find that conservation puts forward a fortress, or what I would call also, I would say a fortress type of model for protecting, to say, communities stay off these, don't touch these resources, effecting bans and etc. And this then brings me to one of the farming philosophies for the School of Wildlife Conservation that I'm working with. Believe that conservation must focus on benefiting people, not just nature. Conservation cannot simply be a luxury for nature's sake, but we need nature as a great pillar of economic growth for Africa. Relationship, that's the relationship between nature and society, to being an economic relationship, then we're able to come up with something strong and a symbiotic relationship between the two. So if I give an example, in Tanzania, we have what I call wildlife management areas, and they have different names in different parts. And you'll find them in Namibia, or you'll find them in a couple of other countries as well. And these are whereby a community sets aside an area and they then leave it for wildlife, and wildlife develops, and then they lease it out to tour operators who then come in, bring in tourists who pay money, and bring in remittances to the communities as the proprietor of that area. And within those operations, they also employ the communities within that. And the communities don't only get remittances from that, but they also get salaries. And so they can use the money that they get from that to satisfy their direct needs, food, shelter, etc., using that money with alternative ways, whilst they can also cover even more. So this increases the value of those natural resources. So it also increases the relationship between different societies. So you'll see on the screen an example. There is a WMA called Makame, and you'll see that from 2011, 2012, through hunting blocks, when they were running it on their own, they were getting about 7,000 US dollars. But now they get about, well, actually a few years later, they were getting as much as 117,000 from leasing out to tourists. So this is a model that I think can be used to improve the relationship.
Thank you so much. And so we're going to get into our question section. We are only going to answer 2 questions because of time. But the unanswered questions, as I said, we're going to address them. So the first question, Juan, is to you. Could you please name 3 emerging agri-tech solutions that LDF could look at for its future projects? And could all the other panelists just chime in if there are other technologies that come to mind?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So one of the key projects I'm working currently is in precision agriculture, and it was been mentioned over the day. So it's all about how much, again, connecting knowledge to the field and how you could actually use water more effectively and, for example, nutrients more effectively. And you could also track everything with IoT, as Lika was also mentioning. Another one could be, for example, long range and long-term monitoring using satellite images. I cannot share many of my projects for obvious reasons, but for example, you could track difference in sizes of farms and track, for example, deforestation as well. And finally, and one of my key models that I'm currently working is productivity models using several variables, again using satellite data. And I know like Lika has like a point about data sharing, and I actually am again very positive about this, because I have the feeling that 10 years ago, if you go to the satellite products, they were relatively rubbish. But right now, I mean, you can almost have near real-time data in very easy to access, and it's fantastic. I know there was another question. I'm going to reply very quickly, and is yes, many people actually change their behavior when they look at the data. And as a data scientist, when I design data products, I try to make it as nice as possible to engage with society. Sorry.
So because we're only going to ask 2 questions, the next question I'll ask will be from I'll use my executive powers. And this goes to Cedric as well as Lika. Please just give me 30 seconds soundbite. Where's your mind? What are you thinking?
So very quickly, I think for traceability, the key would be a process that has confidence, that builds confidence by appropriately pricing carbon that isn't too low or too high, and also keeping the payments process seamless and continuous so that people have confidence in the process. But how to actually deliver payments, that has to be decided depending on the local community. Digital, non-digital payments depends on access to mobile phones. So that's my quick answer.
So I'm just thinking that, you know, through the use of these sort of 3 we're spoken about, one obviously talking about access to information, Leka speaking also about, you know, this AI type work, and then we go down to the, you know, lower level with the communities. I think if we do this, I think we should be able to improve the relationship between society and nature. I think it's a great combination.